Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing But Love. My name is Russ Gluyas and I coordinate ACON's aging program, known as the Love Project or Living Older Visibly and Engaged. The Love Project aims to empower older LGBTQ plus communities, including people living with HIV, to lead healthy, active and more socially connected lives. I would like to start by respectfully acknowledging the Gadigal people, who are the traditional owners and custodians and first people of the land on which I'm joining you tonight. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and would like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank the New South Wales Government for supporting this series of webinars. We're also sharing some of the funding with our Lismore office, and they're doing some in-person events. And I was lucky enough to go up there last week, and they had a seniors lunch, and it was amazing. There was about 65 people come out to the Eltham Hotel for a beautiful seniors lunch, and people came from all over the Northern Rivers to attend that. So it was really nice to hang out with a beautiful bunch of people. The Love Project marks its 10th anniversary this year. And what better way to celebrate than to chat with fabulous LGBTQ plus community heroes, activists, icons, performers, creatives, authors, and businesses who represent our community so well. Tonight, our guest is Catherine Barrett, Director and Founder of Celebrate Aging. Celebrate Aging is a charity committed to creating a world without ageism, a world of respect for older people. They use innovative approaches that engage the whole community in cultural change. The work is co-led by older people through the Elders Leadership Academy. And I'm really excited to talk to Catherine Barrett tonight. Catherine, hello, welcome.
Hey Russ, good to see you again. And
Yeah, lovely.
Russ, I'm on the lands of and want to acknowledge the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Beautiful. And if you'd like to put where you're coming from, anyone that's coming in tonight, we'd love to hear what land you're coming to us from as well. Very important that we acknowledge our traditional owners. Always
Mm.
was, always will be. So, Catherine, it's really lovely. We don't get a chance to talk kind of like this very often. I absolutely admire kind of you and all of the work you do. It's hard to keep up. It seems like, oh my God, there's something else coming up. There's a new project. So, before we get to all of that sort of celebrate aging work that you do, um, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where you were born, and sort of young family life?
Well, I think to talk a little bit about myself, I think one of the things that we share, as well as a passion for older queer people, if people
Yep.
will forgive me using that term, is bundt cake. Russ
Oh, of
taught me
course, yes.
everything I know about baking a good bundt cake.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
I've forgotten about that.
yeah, I grew up in rural Victoria.
Right.
So in Ballarat, which is a
Oh, yeah.
town of just over 100,000 people, but
Yeah.
it felt like a very small town to be
Yeah.
growing up in so many ways. I think probably telltale signs early on that I wasn't straight,
Yeah.
but I certainly knew that it wasn't okay to be anything other than
Other
straight
than, yeah.
in that
Mm.
in that in that town that I grew up in. So I was a bit of a late bloomer,
Right.
and came out, I think, uh, when I was 50,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
and let my husband know that I identified as queer, and that was a pretty tough time
Mm.
for a country ex-Catholic girl from
Yeah.
Ballarat to have to do all that stuff. But there's no looking back.
Yeah. Look, it's one of
Very
those things that
queer community.
you know in your heart that you've just got to
Yeah,
live your authentic self, and whether or not it's 20 or 50. Yeah.
certainly didn't want to hurt anybody, but
Yeah.
hurt is inevitable sometimes, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what I needed to do. So yes, so I live not far from Ballarat now, about an hour and a half away,
Oh,
and
well, good.
I still have family down there now, and my parents very proudly told me when the marriage equality vote was on that they were going to vote yes.
Yay.
So,
Yeah.
it's changed a lot. There's quite a fabulous, a month-long festival
Mm,
in Ballarat now for Pride. And I think, I cheer it on so heartily because
yeah.
it's lovely to think that there's at least the message there that, for people growing up who can be whoever they want to be.
Mm,
But I think also too, we often talk about pride and coming out and transitioning as being, think about the children, but I think there are so many people, older people who couldn't be or didn't know what it was that they wanted or who they were, or, didn't have, the language of queer or
yep.
trans or gay or lesbian or bi,
Yep.
wasn't language they knew. So there are so many people who are older who are now coming out or
Yeah.
transitioning. And I
And
love
that's
to
so
think
beautiful. Yeah.
that, festivals and all that work that you and I do and that
Yeah.
we do in queer communities can send a message to older people that they can be whoever they want to be.
And it's creating those safe spaces too for them to be able to come in and find their community, because often they can be quite sort of socially isolated and
Mm.
disconnected from the community. And often find that when they step into a space like we create, it's the start of a journey.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think it's really different now. I'm sure that for many more younger people who are questioning their sexuality or gender, there are lots of rainbows
Mm,
around that they can, I like to think that they would be able to find someone
yeah.
that they could identify with or look up to or talk to. But I wonder for older people, if it's harder. And when I say that, I'm saying that actually because I know that for some older
Mm,
people, it's incredibly difficult because it may be something that you've repressed all your life.
yeah.
And then you may have children and grandchildren. You
Yep.
may be in a small country town.
Yep.
You may have, and so some of the older folk that I know who've
Mm,
come out or transitioned late in life,
mm,
the repercussions,
yeah.
not just, like transitioning in a heterosexual marriage
Mm,
when you're 70, and then suddenly your wife goes, well, I'm happy for you to be whoever you are, but now we're actually in a same-sex relationship and I
mm,
don't identify as gay.
yep.
So what does
Yep.
that mean for us and our relationship? But then what does it mean for our grandchildren
Yep.
who are going, in this small country town,
Yeah.
and in that school? What does it mean for our grandchildren? And then what does it mean for our daughter and son-in-law's business? And,
Mm,
and you could say, well, they can all just get over it
mm,
because we have the right to be queer, but there are repercussions. And
yeah.
actually, one of the projects that we were going to talk about was kinfolk and ripplegrams, and this beautiful concept that Kathy Mansfield
Mm,
came up with was that there are expected and unexpected consequences, and we have to be able to talk about them and prepare ourselves for them.
yeah.
And I think, I don't know about for you and in New South Wales, but you tell me what it's like, Russ. I think sometimes I think that here we need to do better when it comes to creating safe spaces in queer community for older people to be there. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
part of the work that I did with Midsummer Festival
Mm,
was, they reached out one year and said, we want to be more embracing of our older folk. And so we did some work with the tea tent, which is just
yeah.
the most wonderful thing
Yeah.
to do in the world, to create a space at a queer event where older people could come and sit down and
Mm,
know they had a safe space. We could make them a cup of tea
yeah.
and they could use that as their base camp to go out and explore and come back if they
Absolutely.
felt overwhelmed. But what about our queer film festivals and all the other things that we do? How
Mm,
are older people seeing themselves represented on screen or
yeah.
in those festivals? And
Well,
do they feel
that's
welcome? Do
yeah,
they feel welcome
absolutely.
by queer community? We worry about the broader community and whether it's
Yeah.
welcome. But what about in queer community? Are we welcoming?
Well, a couple of things there. I just remembered when I was lining up to get into Mardi Gras. because we were in the parade this year again. Um, and it just started raining, and they hadn't actually made a separate entrance for the older community to sort of access easily. They had to line up with everybody.
Mm,
So in amongst that line were people with sort of walking sticks and a bit unstable, and it was like, why haven't we thought about
mm,
having a separate entrance? Um, so it makes it easy for older people just to get into the the parade. Um, and along the lines of the films, you might have seen that we do that event called Afternoon Delight, and we've
no,
done it
no.
every year, and we do it with Queer Screen as our partners, and we've partnered with them the whole time. But it's just an afternoon where we screen 3 short films and a feature film, and they're
Mhm.
all queer. They're
Mm.
all framed around an older experience.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic.
but and then we have a fabulous afternoon tea with drag queens, and but every year I go through the same process of approaching them. They say, yes, we want to do this, and we'll look at what we've got coming up. Some years they've sort of really, I've had to really push them to sort of
Mm,
have a look at what's out there and what's being made about us. Um,
mm,
and fortunately, they've found material. We've managed to sort of work it through, and we've usually found a trans experience and a lesbian experience, a gay experience, and a feature film that might bring it all together. Um,
mm.
but it's something that sometimes just is off it's off the radar. It's like, oh, there is
And
stuff out there. So
and
look,
it's, we've had issues as well too with the miserable queer plot for older
yeah,
people. And I get
yeah,
contacted on a regular basis by people going, I want to make a film
yeah,
about a person, an older person living with dementia, and she forgets she's trans, or
yeah,
she forgets she's same-sex
mm,
attracted. And it's just
yeah,
like, I just can't bring myself to do it. And it's not because that never happens.
mm,
Sometimes that happens, but more often, and for example, an older person who's trans, gets dementia, it's not
mm,
that they lose their gender. What they
mm,
lose is their capacity to advocate for themselves.
yeah,
So then you've got service providers and family members who go, well, to me, you're my dad. And
yeah,
I don't like the fact that you're doing
yeah,
that dress wearing. And so, you won't
mm,
do that anymore now. Thank you very much.
yeah,
And so these plots that are thoroughly miserable,
mm,
sometimes I think are worse than,
mm,
than no film about older people at all,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've always managed to sort of get a nice. I'll send you the list of films we've shown over the last 10 years,
Mm,
and we've always worked to get a really nice mix to try and
fantastic.
represent everyone, but also
Fantastic.
have them fairly uplifting as well.
Good.
It is called Afternoon Delight, so I don't want to sort of send everyone away sort of feeling
Miserable.
sad and
Yeah.
miserable. So we've always sort of tried to sort of find a bit of an uplifting plot
Yeah,
to it
good.
all. Yeah.
Well, I think that's really important. I remember Lisa Daniel from the Queer Film Festival
Yeah.
in Melbourne, her saying once that Queer Film Festival was about us seeing our lives reflected on
Mm,
screen
yeah.
in positive ways. And I think for me, it's a chance to recalibrate. If you live in a world where you're
Mm,
constantly feeling that you have to,
mm,
adjust who you are to, make the straight world
yeah.
feel comfortable. And so it's really important that we see ourselves not just
Absolutely.
reflected, but see ourselves, our strengths reflected and the
Absolutely.
joy
Yeah.
reflected back
And
at
the
us.
wonderful relationships we can have and the wonderful experiences that we have. Yeah.
Yes.
I was chatting to someone the other day, um, and it was a conversation around relationships and how we grew up and we only saw straight relationships on the television. We
Yeah.
never saw
Yeah.
queer. So when we started to come out and have our own relationships, it was kind of part of navigating what do we do? We've got no idea. We sort of have to make it up on the go, really.
I remember the first book that I bought from Hares and Hyenas,
Yeah, yeah.
wonderful queer bookshop here. The first book that I bought, and I was thinking, oh, I think I might be a lesbian, I think I might be queer. Bought a book, and look, seriously, I could have climbed back into the closet.
Yeah,
It was just miserable, and there was nothing. Everyone was unhappy,
mm,
no one was, finding love and joy and what they
Yeah.
wanted. And it was
Yeah.
just, um, everybody was really quite dysfunctional. And
Yeah.
so I feel that that's really
Yeah.
important to be able to see the good bits as well. I know life's,
Yeah.
nobody's
Yeah.
muck
Oh, yeah.
after Pollyanna,
Mm.
um, a Pollyanna story, but to be able
But
to,
you don't want sort of all the trans people being murderers or something like that, sort of all that
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
negative kind of
yeah.
edges to everything.
Mm.
I also remember going to the first Pride in Newcastle. I grew up in Newcastle, and I was fortunate enough to I left because I had to get out pretty quickly. It was never going to be big enough for me. But then I ended up going back and doing some counselling work with ACON, which was really beautiful because I got to work back in Newcastle face to face with clients, with people in an area that I knew really well. A lot of trans folk. It was a really emerging trans community. And then they had their first Pride Day, and it was only like 4 or 5 years, 5 or 6 years ago. So I was sort of mid 50s. So it had taken like 55 years
Oh,
for
wow.
me to get that experience of walking in to where I grew up to a Pride festival. And it was really emotional. I had no idea really. I just thought, oh, look, I'm going because it's on. But it was so emotional to sort of
Mm.
everyone on the harbour side and families and
Yeah, wow.
trans kids and everything there. It was really lovely. So it's really important. Yeah.
Oh, look, yeah, I think perhaps I had a similar moment, maybe, of that feeling, that intense sense of pride in the world. The world had changed. It was with marching in Pride March with my swim
Mm,
squad, and there were
mm,
a group of, I think, and the theme was underwater theme,
yeah.
and the women in our squad all dressed as mermaids,
Yeah.
and
Beautiful.
one of the
Yeah.
Todd Patrick was in our swim squad, and he had a dance studio. So he had everything. So
Yeah.
we really were mermaids.
Fantastic.
And remember just this
Yeah.
walking down Fitzroy Street in St Kilda, and all these little kids who actually thought we were mermaids
Yeah.
coming up and wanting to have their pictures taken with us.
Oh, it's
And it
adorable.
was just like, this, I guess, the juxtaposition of, a society that's not valuing, and these little kids going, Mom, it's a
Mm.
mermaid. I want my picture taken
Yeah.
with a mermaid. And it was just this, and, that just fired us up. And
Yeah.
we had so,
It's quite beautiful being in the parade, isn't it? And having
yeah,
people kind of you're the center of attention. There's something kind of quite lovely about that. Like it's
pride.
all about you. It is, yeah.
I think that really there can be, in a Pride March, there can be
Yeah.
something that is really a building of pride that is incredibly
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah. So tell me, what was your earlier career like before celebrating aging? Like, what career path did you take?
Nursing
Yep.
was where I started, and that was what good country Catholic
Yeah.
girls did in Ballarat.
Yeah.
It was nursing or teaching.
Yeah.
And I loved nursing, but I think when I got retrenched after I finished my nursing career
Yeah.
because my results were really bad.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not an exam person.
Yeah.
And so I went to work at the local aged care home, and I was feeling quite devalued because I had been retrenched. But what was really interesting about going to work in the local aged care home, which was then called a benevolent asylum, was that so many people said to me, why are you going there? A young woman like you, why are you going to work with older people? It's career limiting. It's the end of your career. You should be
Mm,
going out and traveling the world and not doing just this really boring stuff. And so I thought, oh, who are these older people that are just in this benevolent asylum that are just so terrible that I shouldn't want to work with them? And I remember the first shift that I worked and meeting older people who were just so wonderful. I just, fell in love with most of them.
mm,
And this realization that I was not feeling valued, and they were very valuing of me. And they were terrific. They were just amazing people. So that was, I think, 1980, 81. And I just decided then and there that this was the group of people that I wanted to work with. So nursing for quite a while, and then academia, research work around older people, but realizing that the research work that I did was incredibly important, but wasn't translating to changes in practice and so what I wanted to do was then set up Celebrate Aging so that I could do research that was embedded in community, and then try and make change happen. So one of my friends calls me a pracademic. So it's that really practical, focused academia, and I love it. This is the best job I've ever had, really.
And so how long has Celebrate Aging been going for?
Over 10 years, so it's about 11 or 12 years.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so we started around the same time because the
Yeah.
Love Project's been going for 10
Yeah.
years. Yeah. So tell me about, because there's so many projects under the Celebrate Aging umbrella. Like, sort of tell me how kind of it comes together, and maybe a bit about funding and the people that sort of co-design the projects with you.
Yeah. Well, so sometimes people go to our website and say, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And there is, and I think probably over the last decade, what we've done is explored quite a bit. And all of it around this theme, this central theme of ageism and respect for older people. But what we wanted to do was to work particularly with marginalised communities. And so that's older queer folk, people living with dementia, culturally diverse communities, and particularly people living with dementia. Because they get dehumanized in terrible ways. So there's sort of, so we sort of followed little pockets of money, but really exploring that, working with any older person who was in the margins, but always coming back to this central theme of ageism and respect for older people. And so I think, as we became a charity, and it's been one person, it's been me for a very long time, but now there are 5 of us. It's much more streamlined and much more centrally focused on ageism. And in the past, where we've done work going out and particular projects with queer communities, now what we're doing is, with this mainstream work, is bringing queer folk in. And I think this is there's a need for both, but I think there have been more and more projects raising awareness of and visibility around older queer folk. We need that absolutely more of it. Must continue for decades, but alongside of that, a lot of the older queer folk we speak to are not just, some of them don't feel like they're part of queer community, but many of them are not just part of queer community, they're part of the broader community, and they want that broader community to see them and understand them and value them as well. They want to be able to go to a carers group and know that they can talk about their partner and not have to educate, the other carers about same-sex relationships. And they're not having to, they can just be a carer. They're not having to advocate and protect their relationship the whole time. So, that's why Kinfolk Project, that work with older trans and gender diverse people in particular, was about, partly it was about educating aged care service providers, but we wanted to understand what was the work that we could do with families to make lives easier for older people who are transitioning gender later in life. So that's kind of where the queer work is increasingly going. And partly that's related to funding, but mostly it's what we feel, what older queer people are telling us they want. They want a safer world around them. And that's in part services, but a lot of it's family. And then it's also to the broader community.
And if you take a step back just for a little bit, and can you tell me more about ageism and the impact of ageism? Because I know the filter is across a lot of the work, but what is it about ageism? Like, what do we need to know?
I think the thing we need to know about ageism, the first thing is that it's not other, it's us.
Mm,
Everybody thinks, there are terrible people out there that are being
yeah.
ageist, but actually, ageism, really important to think about it at an individual internalized
Mm,
level. And there are real parallels between internalized queerphobia and internalized ageism. It's this belief, that you can be gay, but you can't be too gay.
mm,
And there's the kind of parallel is you can age, but it's really you've got a kind of a failed aging. If you let yourself go and you look old or you don't look
mm,
after yourself or you get sick.
yeah.
And so there's that internalized, and then there's cultural, and then there's the sort of policy levels as well too. But I think ageism is seriously underestimated, and probably the most powerful research is coming out of the US. I mean, they've got big numbers,
Yeah.
and there are some longitudinal studies where they've done work with older people to help them value their aging,
Mm,
and they've extended. So these longitudinal studies, they've extended their life expectancy by 7.5 years.
well,
So that's really
yeah.
serious stuff. And the US data is showing that $1 in every seven spent on healthcare in the US can be attributed to the costs of ageism. It's huge,
Wow.
absolutely
Yeah.
ginormous.
It's
And so I
extraordinary. Yeah.
think there's not an understanding, really.
Yeah.
There's momentum, which is great,
Yeah.
and amazing work happening. I think particularly at local level, at councils
Yeah.
particular, but there is such a long way to go, and um, it's really constraining. One of the to give you an example, I worked with a group of older people, and we had a weekly gathering. They had a
Mm,
diary, and we had a weekly gathering, and we'd come together and talk about ageism. And one of the women who was part of that group rang me and said she couldn't um, keep coming to the group because um, she just didn't feel good about her age. And she talked about she had a lunch with a friend
mm-hmm.
and an appointment with her GP. Both of those incredibly important when you think
Yeah.
about, you
Yeah.
know, health check, incredibly important. Social connection, really important.
Mm,
And she was putting on her coat and hat, and she looked in the mirror to adjust her hat, and she saw her reflection, and she said, I don't like what I saw.
mm,
She saw herself as
mm,
an older woman,
mm,
and she said, I don't recognize myself, and
yeah.
didn't like what she saw, and she felt so deflated. She took off her coat and hat, and she cancelled her appointment with the doctor and her friend for lunch. And that's ageism at its worst, and it's
Yeah.
just a tiny little example.
So it's very internalized. It's very like we have to sort of first address our own internal feelings about it to actually then look at it more broadly. Yeah. It's really interesting. Like I remember when I started in the Love Project and we would go out to things like Fair Day when Mardi Gras was on. And for me, it was really exciting. I was out there with the project and I was going to connect with all of these older people and I kind of had my banners and my merch and it was interesting just watching the parade of people go by and they'd kind of look at the Love Project and think, oh, that sounds lovely. And then I'd launch into this sort of spiel about it's all about older people and they oh, that's not me. And I was sort of approaching them also probably generalizing kind of how they looked as well, thinking, oh, this might be something they might like.
Mm,
Um, but they'd sort of reel and go, oh, I'm I'm only 55 or I'm only 50 or that's too much for me. So I started to learn very early on that you've kind of got to be a bit um not careful, but sort of almost a bit shrewd with how you kind of invite people in. Because once they come in, they realize, oh, okay, so this is another way that I can connect and be part of community, and we're kind of all in the same boat. So yeah, it's really interesting how we kind of internalize it. And I know, like, I think I've learned a lot in the last 10 years, but I think my naked ear now is so much more attuned to when someone says something
Mm.
that's ageist or kind of negative about themselves or about somebody else
Mm.
or an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've made old a slur. In so
Yeah,
many ways, old is synonymous with bad. And one of
yeah,
our
yeah.
campaigns is Old is Good, which is really
Mm,
a tribute a tribute to that beautiful, was it 1980s campaign, Gay is Good. And so the whole Old
mm,
is Good is the complete antidote to ageism. It's recognizing um, that there are many good things about growing older. And I think, when we spoke before, I was saying to you that I think in queer community, we are very ageist. And one of
yeah.
the few exceptions that I would say to that is that um, some of the HIV positive people that I've met have,
Mm,
the older men have talked about not expecting to have lived this long.
mm,
And so, like, somebody said to me the other day, my 70th birthday is just such a treat because I didn't
yeah.
expect to be here. And so there's that sense of the preciousness of life.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, and I think that's really important for us to remember that life is a gift. All of us know
mm,
someone who didn't make it this
yeah.
far. I mean, I've got two friends who've died in the last couple of years. Philippa died, was it just last year, and she was
Mm,
55.
yeah.
She'd smack me across the wrist if
Mm.
she knew that I wasn't savoring every day.
Every
And
single
I think,
moment. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to understand
Mm,
that our aging is a privilege. And I think that, there's a lot of literature on ageism and gay men.
mm,
And I think a real pressure for gay men to sort of maintain this
mm,
eternal youth and this pursuit of perfection. But I think we've got to start recognizing that old is beautiful as well too. And the gay
yeah.
men in my life that are aging, that are older, are just
Mm,
beautiful, beautiful men.
mm, mm,
And I think not not despite the fact
mm,
they're older men, because of it. There's a kind of a wisdom and
mm,
authenticity that comes with getting older
yeah.
that they have and that they value. And that's really quite lovely to be.
Yeah, I think I've probably seen a cross section. I think I have got quite a good bunch of older friends and gay friends, male friends around me, embracing just where they are, but
Mm.
there's still a fraction in there that sort of are quite worried about getting older and being less valued. I remember even as a counselor working with ACON, um, several times I was working with sort of clients around kind of 40, and they were seeing themselves
Mm.
as sort of not part of the gang anymore. Like they were starting to sort of really fail and feel like nobody would ever love them because they were 40.
Which
And
is
say,
just which is just
just
such a it's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
I was going to say it's crazy, but that's probably not a good choice of word. But it's just, life is so precious.
yeah,
And, most probably those 40-year-olds, if they spoke to their friends who weren't judgy, people who loved them,
mm,
their friends would tell them that they
we
are
just yeah,
wonderful at 40 or 50 or 60.
absolutely, yeah,
And this is the work that we have to do. We have to value ourselves, because
yeah,
it's going to take quite a long time for the world to change and not be so ageist. Because when you think of the investment of pharmaceutical companies or cosmetic companies or
mm,
the fashion and beauty industry, like this sort of pitching of youth youthfulness is actually a beauty goal. That
mm,
is like, this strive to be something that we're not. And,
mm,
this whole idea of anti-aging is the most immoral word ever.
yeah,
Why you would be anti a person aging,
yeah,
and why you would see some aging as a failure,
mm,
um, is really something that we need to challenge, because um, aging is a privilege.
yeah.
Every day that we've got on this earth is such a privilege.
I was having I was part of the ministerial advisory committee into aging, MACA,
Mac?
in New South Wales,
Mhm.
um, and it was good to see that a big part of that conversation was the impacts, health and well-being of ageism.
Mhm.
And they were taking that all back to sort of government to sort of have that bigger conversation. But it does really feel like something that we just don't talk about enough. We don't hear about it enough.
Mm.
It's not advertised. It's not kind of spoken about. It really does feel like that sort of one-ism that needs a lot more attention.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think it does. And I think
Mm,
it needs to be, the attention needs to be specific to the issues of
yeah,
each subgroup.
yeah,
And, when I speak to my trans and gender diverse friends and colleagues,
mm,
the older friends and colleagues,
mm,
now they talk about ageism in a very different way. And that is that this sense of, uh, for some trans and gender diverse people, that they say to me that there's this pressure to feel like you pass.
mm,
And the very fabulous Sally Conning tells us she
mm,
hates that word so much because, it
mm,
feels like there's an opposite of pass, which is fail, and you never
yeah,
failing.
yeah,
But this in trans and gender diverse communities, this sense of, because I haven't had the same because I came out late, transitioned late, I haven't
mm,
had the same opportunities for gender affirmation, if you
yeah,
like, that gender authenticity. And so people not being, some of the people I know who've not been able to be female in the way they want to. And so they would be recognized as trans.
mm,
And that makes them more vulnerable to violence. But what they've experienced as well too is that some of the parents of younger trans and gender diverse children not wanting to have contact, not wanting
mm,
their children to see the older trans folk as
yeah,
role models,
yeah,
and that, being incredibly hurtful. But so that within trans community, so that's some of the experiences people have
yeah,
shared. But then also to um, the transitioning late, and then the ageism and transphobia from families who,
yeah,
you know, it's not something they ever expected, this shift.
yeah,
Dad is now telling me he's female, and the family's actually stepping up and saying, well, no, you're not doing that. And if you do that, you're not having
yeah.
contact with grandchildren. So that's,
Mm.
it's
There's a
it's
lot
it's
of
something
ripple
of
effects.
ageism and
Yeah,
transphobia, because it's
yeah,
like that sense that, as an older person, you can't do that, and I'm going to take over that decisions making
yeah,
for you.
yeah. It's horrendous. Um, there's so many wonderful projects, we haven't got a huge amount of time left. But what are some of your favorite sort of ones that you've? I know we were talking just before we came on about the postcards. What was that one?
Rainbow Care Cards. That
Rainbow
was a
Care.
really beautiful project, and it was funded by the Victorian State Government Equality Branch. And it was that issue of service providers. And if you think of, rainbow or queer, they think young people. And so
Yeah,
a lot of these services for older people were thinking, the fabulous Grey report, we have none of those people here. And so they weren't investing in being queer inclusive.
yeah,
And so their services then were sending the message to older queer
mm,
folk that it's not safe to be a queer person here, because
yeah,
there's no rainbows, no sign that anyone's had any education.
yeah,
And so to try and cut that cycle of invisibility, my role was as an independent third party. So offering older queer folk the opportunity to share a review, a constructive review. So if you want to make a complaint, there was the information on the complaint.
Yeah.
This was something a service had done that was positive. And the idea was that I would then write up a postcard and then send it to the service and say, you've had an older queer person who's accessed your service. So that was really good that they didn't know who it was.
Yeah.
Could be anyone.
Yeah.
It's part of the point.
Yeah.
Access your service, and this is what they've said you're doing really well, and sent it off. And some of the service providers then got back and just said, oh, that's so beautiful. And one of them was Ambulance Victoria. And that was a beautiful story from an older person who got really sick and had to call an ambulance and was so scared. And then just thought, oh, you know, I've got to sort of mediate my queerness, so that's not going to create any issues. And the AMBO had a rainbow pin.
Yeah.
And this older person said to me, that was
The
everything I knew.
simplest thing. Yeah.
I wasn't going to get
Yeah.
chucked out of the ambulance. I mean, I was really surprised to hear that, like this fear, I'm going to get chucked out of the ambulance. I don't have to think about my queerness. All I have to focus on is getting well. And they said instantly they felt their health improve, like pressure's going down, I'm safe. So we wrote that up in a postcard and we sent it off to the CEO of Ambulance Victoria. And she wrote back, and it was this beautiful letter saying, you know, thank you so much. And I feel that the heartfelt thanks in it, and we'll pass that on to the branch. And so that was really just, you know, we were all crying.
I'm sure.
I'm sure. But it's that idea of trying to cut this cycle of services thinking they don't have to because they've got no queer folk.
I think we forget how deeply embedded the lived experiences are of our older queer community. And I still am amazed when I just sort of listen to some of the stories of marginalization and abuse and stigmatization and being thrown out of employment and thrown out of housing and exposed and all of these things. And it's so deep that, just as you said, it's really hard to sort of all of a sudden, if you're older and you do need to access a service, it's like, like how do I bring my whole self into this and not hold back? And then in that holding back, sort of lessen my experience of having the best possible health outcome as I can.
Yeah, I think I was really amazed at how generous older people were with the service. Their benchmark was really quite low, and it was like, you know, I told them that you know, this is my partner, and so then she knew that we were gay men, and she was really quite you know, didn't bat an eyelid, and then she continued to listen. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you know, that the things that in the broader community you take for granted, that you can tell someone, you know, a man can say, this is my wife, and you know you're still going to be heard. But that's, you know, there's so much that's not assumed because, as you say, in the past, it wasn't okay. So that's a really great process for finding ways for older people to give feedback to services. So services can understand what they're doing good, but also to understand that they've got rainbow people in their service for older people, and then see the value in that.
Do you see a shift? Like, having been in doing what you're doing over the 10 years, I know there's been incremental changes in policies and frameworks. Do you see a shift happening, or is it very slow?
No, there's been an enormous shift. There's been an enormous shift. You know, we've been really fortunate here in Victoria that we've had, you know, a commissioner and a minister and, you know, all those wonderful things. But all around the country, there has been a shift. And I mean, even with marriage equality, we can see there's a shift. But what I also see too is another shift happening. And I see the election in the US, and I see my trans and gender diverse buddies in particular being really scared and people, being having their posts on social media or their groups being reported for going against community standards. And really, it was just a post about trans or a post about queer.
Mm.
And so I think it's really interesting. We're having a conversation with someone before about, they're talking about pride marches and, have we sort of commodified queerness and,
Mm.
are we, what are pride marches about now? Are they about pride, that beautiful sense of
Mm.
pride, or are they about commercial um, interests, and what are they about? And I think actually what we are being called to, the next change, is coming back to community, because the
Mm.
changes in the US and around the world, and we're reading in the paper about, entrapment again on acts
Yeah.
for gay men. And so maybe there is something about us now coming back to community and
Mm.
really supporting each other and remembering what pride is, that pride is not that marching down the road once a year.
Mm.
Pride is, valuing who
Every day.
we are and
Mm.
looking after our people,
Yeah.
looking after our own people. I think that's what pride is for me. It's
Mm.
about community and connection and valuing myself and other people, other rainbow people.
And you've also had a nice intergenerational lens on a lot of the work that you do, which I love, that sort of really um, creating spaces where all ages can come in and learn from each other. Can you briefly just talk about that, like the importance of intergenerational queerness?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting that we had at our queer carnival, we had, or our picnic day, our fair day, we had a
Yeah.
tea tent. Such a beautiful thing to
Mm.
do. We had younger folk serving tea in proper cups and saucers with,
Beautiful.
teddy bear biscuits and ice
Yeah.
vovos, and older folk coming in and sitting down. And, some of them for the first time ever coming to picnic day and just,
Yep. Yep.
uh, eyes wide. And so a beautiful taste of it there. But I think what's really interesting is um, partly a focus on queerness, but partly looking
Mm.
at, in the broader context of our lives. And one of the projects that we've got at the moment is called Gen B, which stands for generational body positivity. And so it's this thing that we know that younger people, terrible body image issues
Yeah.
due to the internet. And we don't call it body positivity with older people, but internalized ageism, body positivity, it's a thing. And so
Mm.
what we've been doing is this work bringing older and younger people together to share messages of body positivity. And we're doing that in a small town in regional Victoria, 3,500 people. And we've got the aged care residents and the U3A sending letters off to the school. And now the mayor and the chemist. But there's a beautiful, very beautiful gay man in town called Max. And what Max has done is written a letter to the queer kids in town. And we've then given, and a little card that says, you are beautiful. And so we've then given this to the queer youth group coordinator, who's endorsed the contents of the letter, and then giving it to the queer kids, and then the queer kids are invited to a confidential online survey to give Max some feedback about his messages. But it's a way of them connecting, partly through
Yeah.
their queerness, but also to
Mm.
saying we're part of the same broader community, and how do we support each other. And that's been a really beautiful project,
Mm.
just looking at all the ways that we can support each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Gorgeous. I always find creative activities too a great way to sort of get people to sit at a table, like a mixed table intergenerationally, and not
Mm.
necessarily have that one-on-one, but you're creating something together.
Yeah,
And in that,
lovely.
conversations kind of evolve from that.
Yeah, lovely. I think with our Centre for Intergenerational Power, which is one of our big programs, uh, we're saying we want to bring old and young together to change the world, because
Yeah.
actually there is so much work to be
Yep.
done, social justice, the
Yeah.
environment. And so when we're bringing people together, we want them to focus on the big issues of our time.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, everybody's passionate about something. So
And was there just off the top of my head, was there a jam making one too? Did you make jam or
no,
no?
but that's
Was it?
just such a great idea.
I think I must have
No,
seen
we
that
did
somewhere.
abundance. Are you thinking about
Oh,
abundance?
maybe.
Which
Yeah.
was preserves.
Oh, preserves. That's it. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that
But that
was,
was a thing like where everyone came together and and cooked together and made these preserves.
yes, and that was uh, around a time of quite significant transphobia in Victoria.
Mm,
And so to start with, we pulled older transgender diverse people in, and we did, the project is called Abundance, a
mm,
story pantry. And so we got the old Fowler's jars,
yep.
and, we workshopped it, and we said to the trans and gender diverse people who participated that imagine the Fowler's jar as a metaphor for
Mm,
you're taking one aspect of your life, recognizing that so much is hard, so much is difficult, taking one thing that's hopeful and bottling it in that jar,
mm,
and like literally bottling it as a piece of fruit. So we had all the
yep.
veggies that people might want to
Yep.
pickle or bottle. But
Yep.
what you're doing by putting it in that jar and then taking a photograph of it is that it is there for a rainy day when you need that to give
Mm,
yourself hope,
yep.
or you might want, that your image of what's in that jar and what is the hope in that jar,
Mm,
the best things about your life right now,
yeah.
is something that you can share to help bring other people hope. So we did that, and it was so beautiful.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
We did it again as an intergenerational workshop, and it was
Yeah.
even better actually.
Yeah. Well, look, there's so much, there's so much going on. Let me just jump to a couple of questions that we got from people that are joining us tonight, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
The first one was, how can we connect better as our aging changes our world?
Mm. How can we connect better? Well, I think the first thing I want to do is applaud the question, because connecting, we know, is one of the key factors to aging well. And I think in queer communities, being connected is even more important, because what we know is that if you're having an experience of discrimination or abuse related to queerness, that
Mm,
having queer allies can be a place to debrief, or a place where people will find ways to advocate for you as well too. I think one of the things that's really important is to engage with, like, if you live in New South Wales, reach out to Russ and ask Russ, how can we better connect in with, what are the activities and things that you can be part of? And sometimes as older people, you've got to kind of muscle in,
mm,
because there may not be any activities for older people. And
yeah.
so you need to put up your hand and say, there are 3 of us or 5 of us, and we know you're doing that group for, whoever else, and would you consider doing one for us? And so get out there and advocate,
Very true.
connect, make those connections. And it doesn't have to be going out to the commercial scene, to bars
Mm,
and all that kind of stuff. And
mm,
I'm not making the assumption you don't want to because you're older. It's certainly something that I don't want to do, but there are so many diverse ways
yeah.
people can connect. Connect to do something for your community, or connect to have
Mm,
a queer book group, or
mm,
to do something for someone else in the community is a really lovely way to connect. But reach out to Russ or
mm.
someone else in queer community and ask them, tell them how many people you got interested, and ask them if
Oh, well, that's why it's so lovely to sort of bring people together, because then they can share. Like, one of my main questions is what's going on for everyone? Like, what are
mm,
you doing? Like, what can we share with each other that's interesting or fun or safe or inclusive? Because I
mm,
think you're right. A lot of sometimes older people don't realize that there is quite a bit going on that they could be involved in, but they're a little bit hesitant or fearful to step into that space. But
mm,
I don't know, everything from music to art galleries to day trips are all possible, and they're all
Tricky.
lovely ways of being together.
Yeah. And I guess I mean, I get that one of the tricky things can be that you're not feeling, people might not be feeling welcome because of their age or because of their
Yeah,
queerness. And so there are all those levels of not feeling sure, but to reach out to Russ
yeah,
and ask what you could be involved in. And if it's not started already, then maybe it's something that you can be involved in starting. It's a
yeah,
great idea.
yeah. Well, look, you've been very generous with your time. We're almost at an hour, so I won't keep you, but thank you for completing the 2024 series. Really lovely to have some time with you and understand, celebrate aging more. I hope, as I said, in the beginning, we can get you up to Sydney and have a broader conversation about ageism. I'd love
Mm.
for that to happen. But I've got nothing but love for you, as always. And I really appreciate your time tonight, Catherine.
Russ, and how could anyone have anything but love for you? You are amazing. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate
We learn from each other.
Yeah, good.
And I've got lots of nice little emojis going up from our conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye for now.